If asked why I became a Jesuit, I can only say it's like with painting. I felt compelled to do it. Ultimately, it was out of love.
In my last year at school, there were 4 subjects that interested me: philosophy, theology, political science, and journalism. And I asked myself, in what profession could I combine all 4?
When I was at university, I decided to become a priest. I got to know the Jesuits, and I was impressed by their work. I thought it would be a good group in which to be a priest, and the past 10 years have confirmed that.
I thought I should start with what seemed to be the craziest option, and if it didn't work out, I could always do something else.
Finding God in all things is the core of Jesuit spirituality. That means not retreating behind the walls of a monastery, but reaching out to the world with a positive attitude.
Jesuits write the letters S.J. after their names, indicating they're members of the Society of Jesus. The term Jesuit was originally an insult, implying people who can't stop talking about Jesus. But the followers of St. Ignatius proudly accepted the intended insult and carried the name Jesus into the world as missionaries and teachers, scholars and pastors. With a strong hierarchical structure, they've also been called the soldiers of Christ. Their aim? To search for God in all things and help others. Father Tobias Zimmermann is the rector of Canisius College in Berlin. It's one of 3 high schools run by the Jesuits in Germany.
Let's start the day by singing a happy Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.
To the greater glory of God. Jesuits have been famous for their schools since the order was founded in the 16th century. It runs colleges and universities around the world. Today there are 17,000 Jesuits in 95 countries.
The official name, Society of Jesus, means that we are his companions. Our aim is to be available, not just to a local church or a particular region, but wherever we're needed. I joined an international order with the idea of perhaps working in the field of international relations. But my superior said to me, Berlin is also important. Youth work is important. And he sent me to do youth work in Berlin.
Father Jörg Alt works in the southern German city of Nuremberg, organizing political campaigns to combat poverty in the world. He himself says he was 20 when he discovered that God had plans for him.
Working with asylum seekers in Würzburg was a watershed for me. I saw how our wealthy nation dealt with people who came to us in need. They didn't receive help, but were often treated worse than dogs. And I realized that I couldn't accept that, especially because the Jesuit order sees faith and justice as belonging together.
Jesuits have the mission of creating a more just world. Their faith demands solidarity with the poor. Father Alt says donating money to poor nations, as was done in the past, is not enough. He's spent many years researching the causes of conflict and poverty in developing nations and bringing them to the attention of the German public. A Sunday morning in the eastern German city of Leipzig. Father Clemens Blattert is a university chaplain here.
I was due to be sent to Santo Domingo to work in a slum for 2 years. But then there was this vacancy in Leipzig, and my superior decided that I was needed here. So that's how I became university chaplain in 2009.
Judith, kannst du noch schnell schauen, ob alles gerade ist und richtig liegt?
Father Blattert is popular with the students. He sees his main task as listening to them and helping them come to terms with their lives. That's his vision of pastoral service, one of the Jesuits' key activities.
I think of pastoral care as giving people your time, finding time for the people who come to you, and creating space for their concerns. You can't set an agenda. The students come with whatever's on their minds, problems with their studies, their relationships, with faith, doubts, a very wide range of issues.
Also die Palette ist eigentlich riesengroß.
While Mass is being celebrated in the chapel, volunteers prepare a midday meal. About 100 people are expected. Father Blattert says the spirit of freedom is typically Jesuit. No subject is taboo, even in questions of faith. The students are attracted to this intellectual freedom. Many of them are trying to make sense of their lives and searching for faith, wrestling with what the Church teaches and their own understanding of the truth.
Where I come from, people go to church out of habit. I have the feeling many of them don't question their faith. They go to church because others go. But here, only people who believe go to church. I've met some who have a very deep faith, and that has impressed me. It's made me question my own beliefs and discuss them. And religion has become more important in my life.
Father Alt believes that everybody has good and bad in them, which shapes their lives. He says it's important to focus on what's good.
I think everybody has aspects with which God can work. I've always believed that curiosity is a very important quality, to analyze and understand the way that things are connected. That's why Goethe's Faust means a lot to me. Faust is a character who struggles to understand what binds the world's innermost core together.
A nobleman from the Basque country, Ignatius of Loyola, founded the Society of Jesus in Rome in 1540. At a time when the Catholic Church was reeling from the effects of the Protestant Reformation. His aim was not to turn his back on conflicts, but to embrace the world, to secure it for God. He and his companions took a special oath of loyalty to the Pope. They were prepared to be sent wherever they were needed. 473 years later, in March 2013, a Jesuit was elected Pope for the first time in history. With Jorge Bergoglio, former Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the papacy and the Vatican have adopted a new style.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
I'm surprised and delighted by his wisdom. On the one hand, he has introduced changes and raised lots of hopes. But many people say it's all talk and symbols. To put it in Jesuit terminology, I think this man is setting the scene for more.
Especially his lack of inhibition, his boldness in reaching out to people. I think this inner freedom is typically Jesuit. If I have this freedom, I can reach out to people without fear, be open to the difficulties, embrace problems in the church.
I feel very much at home with him. But I think he'll also confront the church with unfamiliar issues. It's important not to create the impression that we Jesuits monopolize him. First and foremost, he's the Pope, not a Jesuit. In his current job, that's important. But we'll find him less familiar when he speaks as a Latin American about poverty and has a few things to say to Europe.
In March 2014, at the Jesuit mission in Nuremberg, Jörg Alt and the head of the mission, Father Klaus Fehrtröder, presented their latest book.
This is a good time to sum up what Pope Francis has begun changing in the Church during the past year. Let's consider his statement, "How I would like a poor church for the poor," whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's disturbing or helpful.
What stand should the Church take on poverty? The two Jesuits have questioned experts on the struggle against poverty worldwide. They've also asked poor people themselves and come to the conclusion that the Church should retain its wealth but use it to fight poverty.
I love getting out in the fresh air. When I'm not working, I like to go walking or hiking or do some gardening. Somehow I feel closer to heaven then.
Ignatius of Loyola wanted his companions to look at the world attentively and without bias, and to find God there. Together, these two aspects create a spiritual path, one that Jesuits continue to follow today. It's the spirituality that informs their lives. Their aim is to open their senses to a deeper level of reality.
Creation is not something that happened in the past. That's a misconception. God's creation is continuous. I mean, you can see traces of God in His creation. You can find God in everything. And what you can find in yourself, if you listen carefully, is of course not the voice of God, but your own spiritual life, which is the result of God's activity. You can sense it. It's like a stone falling into water. You may not see the stone, but you can see the ripples that the stone causes.
Tobias Zimmermann is also pastor at the Maria Regina Martyrum Church in Berlin. The church is dedicated to the memory of German Catholics who resisted the Nazi ideology because of their Christian faith and paid for that courage with their lives. Some of them were Jesuits. Rejection and death are part of this world. Jesuits have to accept that. But deeper than suffering is the knowledge that God is to be found in all things, if only you are open to him and listen. At this Mass, Father Zimmermann focuses on the process of listening.
Das ist manchmal verstörend.
Sometimes it's unsettling, and at the same time you discover entirely new tones, new harmonies. And sometimes you're reminded of something from everyday life. And suddenly, when you walk through the world again later and hear other sounds, that's what it's about. That we let it take us there, to savor things. That we let ourselves be taken into a meaning that doesn't lie behind the things, but on the surface, in what we experience immediately, in what we see and hear, what we sense and feel, that we experience the world as being filled with a God who seeps out of the world's every pore. He's not in some kind of holy shrine somewhere behind a curtain, but right there in the world that we experience every day.
Sondern direkt in der Welt, die uns jeden Tag begegnet.
Tobias Zimmermann is 47. He has long been fascinated by the ideal of a life dedicated to God. He entered the Jesuit order 24 years ago. He was an artist well before that.
Seit ich denken kann.
I've been painting for as long as I can remember. There was also a time when I played music, but I've always painted. I can't live without painting. For me, it's a kind of prayer, but that's not necessarily obvious in the paintings themselves. It's similar to the world itself. God can be found everywhere. That means that my pictures don't have to be explicitly religious.
Das heißt, die Themen müssen nicht explizit religiös sein für mich.
Jesuits don't live in monasteries, but in communities. University chaplain Clemens Blatter takes his turn at cooking, like the other 4 Jesuits with whom he lives. As in other religious orders, Jesuits take vows. On becoming a member of the Society of Jesus, Jesuits promise obedience to the Pope and to their superior. They also vow chastity and to follow a simple, modest lifestyle.
When I walk in the park, for instance, I'm happy when I see young families. But during my training, it was a painful thought that I would never have children of my own. That is a sacrifice. However, what I do now is so fulfilling that I tell myself, I can't have everything, I can't do everything. I'm happy for young families when I see them, and I go my own way and find fulfillment there. Weg und finde darin Erfüllung.
For many Jesuits, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius are the foundation of their lives. A set of meditations and prayers that help you reach important decisions by opening yourself to God. Clemens Blattert also offers them to lay people. The basic assumption is that God has a special task for each of us. Here in Leipzig, Father Blattert has read a short passage from the Bible.
I can imagine this incident very clearly, and with it set the scene. What do I see? What do I hear? What's happening here? And what is my role in this scene?
Und wo ist mein Platz?
The most important spiritual exercise for me was when, as a 20-year-old novice, I imagined spending an afternoon together with Jesus in Nazareth, making tables in Joseph's carpentry shop.
Also mit Jesus in der Werkstatt bei Vater Josef irgendwelche Tische zu hobeln, anschließend am Abend.
Then in the evening going swimming in a pond outside the town, and then having a meal that Mary had made. In that spiritual exercise, in which I had the feeling that I was really in Nazareth, I realized that Jesus was also a 20-year-old once, and thought about his vocation to preach and proclaim the kingdom of God. Is this something that I, the 20-year-old Jesus, must do, or am I just fooling myself? I realized that Jesus was confronted with much the same question as I was facing as a young Jesuit, and I sensed a connection, a bond. I felt that I was following my own vocation, my own path in life, together with him.
Meinen Berufungs- und meinen Lebensweg gehe.
I spent the final period of my training in Los Angeles. We were 7 guys from 7 different countries, from Africa, Asia, Europe, and America. And I discovered that we were very similar, because we were molded by these exercises, this attempt to follow Jesus. We thought the same way, in spite of the cultural differences.
Canisius-Kolleg is still one of the most respected high schools in Berlin, in spite of revelations about child abuse in the past. The Jesuits' educational ideals influence the life of the students.
A Jesuit school should be a place where students experience human dignity, a place where they experience justice. That means a place where their human dignity is respected. It should be a place open to the question of God. And the school should be a place where children are educated to help others. That means a place where my own career is not my only goal, but where I learn to value others in my life, always to have them as part of my plan.
In 1986, when I was working with asylum seekers in Würzburg and first came to the conclusion that it's not enough to hand out blankets and shoes, but that we have to change the political decisions that underlie the problem, my superiors told me a Jesuit should not get involved in politics. But I was stubborn, and after the breakthrough with the anti-landmine campaign, which the Jesuit refugee organization started in Cambodia, and after we achieved an international commission forbidding anti-personnel mines and won the Nobel Prize, other Jesuits also began to realize that it's a task that has to do with faith and with justice.
Dass das eine Arbeit ist, die sehr wohl etwas mit Glaube und Gerechtigkeit zu tun hat.
The history of the Jesuit order is long and complex, and there have been some shameful chapters. But the 20th century saw a spectacular modernization, which some theologians view enthusiastically, others as merely following a fashion. In Africa and the United States, the order is growing, whereas in Germany, there's a shortage of vocations. Here, there are only 350 Jesuits. But they're all committed to being companions of Jesus.
You have to burn with a flame that you want to pass on to others. And I've met a lot of people who have given me that flame. They inspired me. And I said to myself, I want to be somebody who is full of fire.
St. Augustine says, "My heart is restless until it rests in God."
It's about loving Jesus, being fascinated by his life, by his person, and the desire to follow him. The Jesuit Rupert Meyer once put it very beautifully. When asked what Jesus meant to him, he said, "Everything." That's a wonderful answer, because you have to honor it.
Ist eine große Antwort, weil das muss man erstmal auch einlösen, aber letztlich ja.